Evolution is really the same thing as adaptation, except that it operates on a different scale. Adaptation is an element's capacity to generate a response to some change within its environment. It is a micro or local level phenomena. Evolution, then, is the same process but operating on a macro scale, that is to say, on the level of a population of agents, and here again it is the capacity for the system to respond to changes within its environment. Evolution is the adaptive response of a group of entities that occurs over a period of many life cycles. Evolutionary changes reflect the response of the collection of agents to their environment.
Many of you will have heard of evolution and natural selection, but it hasn't always been this way. In the early 19th century, scientists were still very much in the dark as to how living things evolved. While the idea of evolution had been around for a while, the phenomenon went unnamed and was without a proposed mechanism until Jean-Baptiste Lamarck had an idea. Lamarck, a zoologist, noted that animals seemed very well suited to their environments and suspected that throughout their lifetimes, animals improved themselves. For example, a giraffe's long neck was thought to be the result of the animal's continual stretching in order to reach food that was higher and higher from the ground. Lamarck also thought that these changes caused by the animal's struggle to survive were passed on to the next generation, which then continued the evolutionary process. In other words, a new baby giraffe would have a longer neck as a result of its parents stretching for their food. Before looking into another theory of evolution, a little test for you. According to Lamarck's idea, what would happen if two animals that had spent their lives using their right limbs far more than their left limbs had offspring? If you said something similar to their offspring would have had overdeveloped set of right limbs, you're right. Around 2 years after Lamarck's death, a young Charles Darwin set off on a voyage that would change his life and science forever. Prior to setting sail on the HMS Beagle, Darwin had spent some time studying under some of Lamarck's contemporaries, and thus had an understanding of Lamarck's theories on inheritance. What he found on his voyage, however, did not seem to fit with Lamarck's ideas. Instead, Darwin developed his own idea of descent with modification. The key difference here is that in Darwin's idea, the traits of the parents were passed on without being modified by the life of the parent. What Darwin realised was the importance of the fact in any population of living organisms there already exists variation in any given characteristic. As a result, he argued nature would favour, or select, the fittest variants. This is natural selection. By fitness, Darwin meant the ability of an individual to survive and to pass on its characteristics to the next generation. Over time, changes in the characteristics of a species could occur. He also proposed that the changes within a species occurred very slowly through a gradual process. In the case of the giraffe neck, natural selection would continually favour giraffes with longer necks, so that over time the average neck length in the population would gradually increase. Following over 20 years of work, Darwin eventually published his idea of evolution by natural selection, after another man named Alfred Russel Wallace wrote him a letter saying that he had thought of the exact same thing. But that's a story for another.
To biologists. The study of finches led to the development of one of the most important scientific theories of all time. But how did this come about? In December 1831, a naturalist called Charles Darwin boarded the HMS Beagle bound on a surveying voyage to South America. Whilst the ship and crew carried out coastline surveys, Darwin was free to explore the islands en route. In 1835, the Beagle arrived at the Galapagos Islands near Ecuador. What Darwin found there surprised him greatly. As well as giant tortoises and marine iguanas, Darwin collected and preserved a variety of different songbirds called finches. Upon returning to the UK, he examined them together with ornithologist John Gould and made some fascinating discoveries. The scientists observed that the birds were all similar to a single type of finch found on mainland South America, suggesting that these mainland finches had originally colonized the island. However, the Galapagos finches were all slightly different from the original mainland species, and they were also different from each other. The The finches on each island showed distinct variations in their overall size, beak shape, and claw size. These differences were attributed to the differing food sources available on the various islands of the Galapagos. Some of the birds had long, thin beaks and sharp claws suited to catching and eating insects, while others had large, powerful beaks suitable for cracking open nuts. Because of the distances between the islands, breeding between different species of finch was unlikely, and Darwin concluded that the finches must have evolved over time from the original mainland species to suit the conditions found on each individual island. In all, 13 of the birds brought back by Darwin were identified as being entirely new species, all similar to each other, but with definite variations from their common ancestor. Darwin proposed that the variations seen both within and between the finch species arose by chance. Variations which gave any individual a competitive advantage made them more likely to survive and therefore reproduce, outcompeting those with less advantageous characteristics. Darwin called this theory natural selection, and he published it in his book On the Origin of Species in 1859. Evolution by natural selection is now widely agreed to be the most accurate theory to explain the origin and diversity of all life on Earth. In this video, you have learned how the finches of the Galapagos Islands led to the development of the theory of evolution by natural selection. Is evolution of these birds still happening? See what you can find out.